Thanks, Chair. On page in the action log, so I have nothing on the minutes. In the action log, there's two open actions on page 12 of 149 in the pack. Could we have any kind of update on those open actions, such as whether the combined authority is signed up to the Plain English campaign and what we're going to find out about e-scooters?
Do we have an officer who wants to respond to that?
We can check with that and get those actions updated.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll send an update round to all members after this meeting. Otherwise, are people happy to accept the minutes and note the action log? Yeah. Election of vice chair. So I'd like to start by thanking Andy Coles for the work he did both as vice chair and a rapporteur on skills, and as a member of this committee generally. But because he's stood down from the committee, we need a new vice chair. So can I ask for any nominations for the position of vice chair, please? Councillor Rippeth?
Can I propose Councillor John Fox, please?
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Atkins, thank you. Any other nominations? So all those in favour, please. All those against? And abstentions? Okay. Congratulations, Councillor Fox. So now we move on to item 6, the improvement framework. And before we start on that, I just want to make a short statement. I'd like to make a point about the Code of Conduct matter, which is referred to within this report. The Code of Conduct hearing was concluded on the 14th of November 2023, and a decision notice has now been published. The decision has been made by the Audit and Governance Subcommittee. Audit and Governance are a statutory committee, and as set out in the CPCA Constitution, they are responsible for the standards and committees' hearings. The decision of this committee is final, and there is no further right of appeal. The committee decision is simply for noting at the Combined Authority Board, and there is no scope for scrutiny of this decision. I would like to remind you that the function of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to scrutinise the decision-making of the Combined Authority Board, the thematic committees, the officers of the authority, and member ethics. This committee has an influential role in shaping policy and decision-making that will benefit the overall CPCA region. As per the agreed scope of work for the committee, has 4 key roles. Accountability, ensuring decision-making is effective, aligned to strategic objectives and not taken in isolation. Performance, review and oversight of performance against strategic targets and key indicators. Policy, early involvement in decision-making and detailed review of performance can identify areas for policy development or existing policy gaps. And cross-cutting issues of significant concern. There will be issues which cut across a range of portfolios and across the Combined Authority and other organisations' responsibilities, as well as areas of significant regional public concern where scrutiny review is required. So does anyone want to raise any comments on the improvement framework report? Angela, would you like to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. The focus for the improvement item today is culture, confidence, and capacity deep dive that Kate will lead you through. But just before I pass across to her, committee, the overall programme, the improvement programme, is rated as green at the end of October. And the improvement group continues to understand and address the key links between the different elements, the deliverables that are set out. In the report, in paragraphs 2.2 to 2.9, it sets out the progress that has been made over September and October against the themes, and that is supported by the detail in the attached highlight report. Just before I do pass across to Kate, I would draw your attention, the committee's attention, to the outcome of the recent internal audit review, and that's set out in paragraph 2.10, where it states that the board can take reasonable assurance that the controls upon which the organisation relies to manage the areas of governance are suitably designed and consistently applied and effective. So, Chair, on that matter, and I am aware of the agenda today and the items on it, I will pass across to Kate and colleagues to take you through the culture, confidence and capacity deep dive.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning, committee. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Kate McFarlane, the Corporate Director of Policy and Engagement at the Combined Authority, and I'm the Corporate Management Team Lead for this particular improvement work stream. So I'm just going to quickly pull out some of the highlights from the report, but you'll notice there are a couple of colleagues to my right, as there may be some workforce and staffing issues that you're keen to explore, given that's quite a strong focus of this particular work stream. So as a very brief introduction, and this is on page 46 in your report packs, appendix 2 of the improvement report, what you can see is that the key outcomes for this particular work stream are around 4 areas. So it's actually quite a broad work stream, but the work stream is focusing on establishing a strong direction for the Combined Authority via clearly defined ambitions and priorities. Secondly, very much focusing on fostering a positive work culture for staff and members, so a focus on values and behaviours. The third area then is around developing high quality and effective leadership at all levels. And then the fourth area is around ensuring there are coherent plans in place to ensure essentially that we've got the right resources to deliver against our organisational priorities. So looking at recruitment, retention, reward and resourcing. Pages 46 to 51 of the report then gives a little bit more detail against each of those 4 areas and some examples of the activities that are being taken forward. So, for example, against the first area of ambitions and priorities, what you can see through this work stream is that throughout the last kind of 9 to 12 months across the organisation, following the adoption of the corporate strategy, directorate business plans have been adopted, that we are now in the process of refreshing that corporate strategy and introduce things like the corporate performance reporting framework. So some of the items that you have already seen coming to scrutiny and are coming later today are part of this work stream. And then moving on, what you can see is things like leadership, and it will talk about some of the leadership and development programs that have now been launched within the Combined Authority, some of the recruitment activity, which you can see in Appendix 2A, and there's also some indicators in there in terms of the changing retention rates and the stability indicators for the Combined Authority. And then moving on, there's quite an extensive piece of work has taken place in terms of values and behaviours. So across the Combined Authority, earlier this year, the sets of values, civil values were adopted, and we have now embedded, or are embedding, I should say, the behaviours framework, which are the behaviours that we would expect and not expect to see. And flowing from that, the last area of activity is very much around the workforce, the recruitment, the retention side, and looking at some key pieces of work there in terms of the move to recruit permanent members of staff, the move to look at how we improve our recruitment procedures and align that values-based recruitment, as well as many of you will have seen through the HR committee over 25 new HR policies adopted. So throughout all of these pieces of work, there's some real foundation activities that have been taking place in terms of getting some of those foundations absolutely in place. And what we've been doing with staff over the last 9 to 12 months through 3 staff surveys and I think 4 staff conferences we've completed now is just continually checking back. So using the surveys and the conferences to both take to test how staff are feeling, to test how staff are feeling we are as an organisation and where we're moving towards, but also crucially getting that feedback and that input in terms of that next development and the next areas of focus for the organisation. So what you can see in the report are just some of those comments from staff, some of those measures of improvement in terms of we perhaps didn't really know who we were and what we were doing, and some comments in terms of where people are feeling they are now. For us, the culture, capacity and confidence work stream will be kind of continuing beyond the improvement programme, because what we're talking about here now is starting to move into organisational development territory. So it goes without saying that we'll be continuing with staff surveys, and the next one will be taking place in Q4 of this year. So a key area in terms of the workforce, which I know the committee are particularly interested in, is that embedding of the improvements that we've made, embedding of the culture values and behaviours. I'm going to stop there, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavour. It is a broad work stream. And particularly that ambitions and vision first area of activity is something that we would be keen to be engaging the committee in the early part of 2024, as some of those key pieces of work, such as the State of the Region review and the development of a shared vision for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, are moving forward at pace. There will absolutely be opportunities for Scrutiny to be feeding into those key pieces of work and testing those when they're further down the line.
Thank you very much. Clearly a lot of work going on. But before I open up the discussion, I need to clarify, what I said earlier. Overview and scrutiny can scrutinise executive decisions made by individual members, but not ethics. That will be for audit and governance. So that decision has been made, and I'd ask all members of this committee to refrain from discussing the code of conduct matter. So thank you. Any comments, questions from the committee? Councillor Fitzgerald.
Sorry, I don't like to jump in too quick. I note it says recommendation A particularly. I'm interested in the work of the improvement board in terms of benchmarking where we are. I know it makes reference to the auditor's best value notice and Ernst Young, but at the moment I have no idea where we are on that improvement journey, because I'm not sure I've seen a recent panel briefing about the progress made. It refers to a meeting in May. Am I right, or did I miss something? This is about the whole capacity, leadership, culture. Sorry, I should have elaborated a little further. Sorry. Sorry, I expected you to be a mind reader, don't worry.
So Kate, do you want to respond to that?
If I can. So, sorry, can you just confirm exactly which paragraph you're talking about? Is it the specific briefings?
It's one of the recommendations. A, firstly, the start of the paper. I just wanted you to flesh out and point me to somewhere where this work that you're doing relates to the improvement overall of the combined authority.
Sorry, Councillor Fitzgerald, can you put your microphone on, please?
There we go. How's that? I did try. I wasn't wishing to be rude. So, how your work and that work ties together, I don't see any link at the moment in terms of that overall improvement journey, because we're talking about the improvement framework, and whether or not we're making progress against what was laid out in the auditor's concerns. Have we made progress on that? So, has that improvement panel reported back? Might go to the board, but I'm saying I don't think we're cited on it at the moment, and it's quite old because it refers to May.
Okay, if you can, okay.
Chair, I will try and pick that up. So, just in relation to the comment about the key elements that were identified either by the external auditor or the best value notice. So, the external auditor's letter generally focused on elements of governance and the conclusion of the code of conduct investigation. The best value notice is the one that picked up the elements that have focused on some of the themes, such as project planning and delivery, partnerships, procurement, and indeed culture, confidence, and capacity. And what the best value notice set out, that it wanted to see that the CA was delivering its best value duty and to deliver a lasting change across the organisation. And it gave us an example, such as in terms of culture and relationships. And the second element that was pulled out of the best value notice was that current vacancies in the authority senior management team, particularly at chief executive level, and the prospect that this could increase further from July 2022. So it picked up, and these have been the real focus for what we have done through the areas of improvement. And that is why, through culture, confidence, and capacity, the key elements and the outcomes that have been set out and owned and led by Kate on behalf of CMT are to specifically address those elements of the best value notice. In terms of progress, that you asked, Councillor Fitzgerald, on a monthly basis and reporting through to the board and committees, we set out progress against the plan that was signed off in May this year by the CA board that set out how we would address those key areas of concern. And we come to this committee, Audit and Governance, and the CA board, and indeed meet with the IIB on a bi-monthly basis where we report progress. The focus indeed from the external auditor with regards to progress, and indeed from DULUC, will come through the discussions that will have been and will continue to take place. But we report the progress by the IIB sees, and there will be a note that will be circulated again later this afternoon following the IIB meeting that took place last week. So hopefully, Chair, that helps. But the whole focus for the improvement is based on the key issues that were set out by the external auditor and indeed the best value notice.
Did you want to follow up, Councillor?
It was just, thank you very much. That was clear. I think the point I'm asking was about the update and what you just said it'd be next week, following the meeting last week. Or sorry, later today, because that's what's missing from me today. Thanks.
Any other comments? Yes, Councillor.
I just wanted to say, firstly, clearly there has been a lot of progress made. I think having attended this committee, since over 12 months, is that over this period, since the best value notice, you can clearly see that a lot of action has been taken. I just wanted to talk about the staff surveys and just whether you could give a bit more colour on the level of engagement. I think what you're seeing in the surveys looks like to be a level of continuous improvement, but are you getting a lot of engagement from staff? Are you getting more people filling out the surveys now than at the beginning?
So in terms of engagement, it's the last two surveys were about the same number, in fact, probably the same number of responses, which was kind of under 50%. So that's not where we would want it to be. So as we're looking to launch the next staff survey, one of the key things we're really wanting to look at is how we increase the number of colleagues responding. And we think it's really important that we are able to play back not only what we're hearing from those staff surveys, but the actions and the things that are changing as a result of hearing those voices and hearing those views. So as we launch the next staff survey, we're going to be doing it in a slightly different way, in that we are moving the staff survey on, because we recognise that we need to be looking more to the future, but also really ensuring that we're continuing that feedback loop, really, in terms of what people are saying and then the changes that have been implemented or the changes that are still going to be coming up. But increasing that number is absolutely something we're focused on.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good response. I think I totally concur with your actions there. Is that surveys just getting as many people to participate and encouragement, because if you don't survey the whole staff body, then you really don't know. And I think success is, unfortunately, we're getting to the sharp end of success, because we've done a lot of recruitment, we've filled a lot of vacancies, but if we don't act on that, there's potential that we could fall foul again. But excellent, thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, councillors.
Yeah, just a small thing. The word conference was mentioned. It's nice to have get-togethers. Sounds very sort of formal. And obviously, this whole thing is very formal. My experience as a councillor is less formal often, but maybe away a days or something like that, away a half a day, or socials even might help with staff bonding, feeling more part of the organisation, eye-to-eye contact in person, that sort of thing. Just a suggestion, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that question if that's okay. Just to introduce myself to everybody, I joined the CPCA last month as the AD of HR, so still quite new, but getting to know everybody. So, thank you for that comment, Councillor. Completely agree. There's a number of things that we have been doing. Obviously, we mentioned about the staff conference, and we did the latest one that was held did have about 80 members of staff attending, so that was really well attended. So we did take feedback and people were engaged with that. One of the things that I've started to do in the last couple of weeks is to engage with the directors, to join them on such things as their away days, to talk through and to do a section on things like values and behaviours, and actually to do some work around that. And that's absolutely something that we're encouraging all the directorates to do, and will be happening over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion points? Yes, Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to perhaps scrutinise a little just this the in-depth kind of deep dive that we've been asked to look at around the kind of staffing and culture piece. And obviously, I can see that we've rated it green, I think, on the basis of a large amount of activity, which seems to have gone very well. Which is to be welcomed. But I think perhaps building on some of Councillor Hassell's comments, looking at some of the results from the most recent staff survey, it still paints quite a fragile picture of the workforce in some ways. So, most staff, because the organisation has grown so rapidly, most staff have fewer than 2 years of service with the organisation, and about half of them don't feel valued, or at least aren't prepared to say they do feel valued by the organisation. They seem to have a higher, sort of a better relationship perhaps with their direct manager, but that's kind of quite a fragile thing to build a whole workforce around, because obviously then if that manager might leave and move on, and then there might be concerns about the performance of the rest of the team. So are you confident that this work stream is in the right place, even if the data behind it, I think, paints a not entirely kind of perfect picture?
Thank you, Councillor. I think absolutely take your point. I think it's probably worth remembering that some of these comments are back from May. I think there has been a lot of work that's also been happening since May. When we do win the survey, the next survey shortly, we would hope obviously that some of that will also improve as well. There is a lot of things that we've been putting in place as well in that time, such as corporate inductions, so that when new people are starting, they do start to understand the values of the organisation, and hopefully that helps to for people to feel connected more to the organisation as well as their manager. So I think there has been a lot of work around that, and they sort of talked about those away days and sort of people trying to understand the conferences. We talk about the strategic priorities of the organisation. So it's really trying to help people feel connected with that organisation as well. So we absolutely would hope that the next staff survey will show that improvement as well.
Thank you. If we could have the results of the next staff survey back to this committee, I think that would be of interest. Thanks.
Is that possible? Yep. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. In 2.5, you show the headcount, and I think it's a very interesting graphical representation, and it's showing at 128 at the end of Q4. The question I have really, which I couldn't find in the report, and forgive me, it might be in there, but I just couldn't find it, was how many headcount should we have, and how many are filled with temporaries, as opposed to, because this only appears to be looking at full-time head.
So I'm Donya Taylor, HR business partner. So worked with Nikki and putting most of the detail in this report together. In terms of the headcount over 128, so we had. It's difficult to estimate how much, what the headcount should be in the organisation because we're continually evolving. We do have a number of people that are on interim contracts, but we would that figure is starting to reduce, and we would expect that to reduce over the coming months.
Thank you. I respect this may be something you're going to have to come back to us on, okay? But the number of positions in the organisation should be black and white. It changes, but at this moment in time, if we were to say at noon today, what are the number of positions? You've got the number of employees and the number of vacancies added together equals the number of positions. So I was curious to that, and then I want to know, on top of the 128, how much we've got are temporaries that we're trying to replace. Maybe some contractors we're not trying to replace. And then logically, the next area of scrutiny on that is, and therefore, how much is it costing us for temporary resource and the like, as opposed to having employees? So that's where I was going with the scrutiny. So if that helps you to come back to us, I think that's something that would be very useful to scrutinise.
I think if you could give us something in writing after the meeting, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
If I can just add to that, I think absolutely we can come back to you. There's a number of things that are changing at the moment within the organisation. So we're obviously trying to dial down interims, recruiting permanent members of staff. We have some areas where we are TUPEing roles in. And there's also within the Net Zero Hub, which covers the whole of the Greater South East, there's quite a bit of recruitment in that space as well. So there's a number of variables and changes that are occurring. And then wrapped around all of that, as I think you would expect a corporate management team to be doing, we're looking at our future workforce strategy. So I think we can put all of that, we will bring all of that back together, but it's a picture of some things ebbing and flowing and changing over periods of time. So we'll pull that together for you so you get a sense of that.
If I may, Chair, through you. The area I would like to scrutinise is the expenditure on temporary resource as opposed to permanent employees as a percentage of our workforce. I can't get to that from the figures that are presented. So maybe if you could answer that question, then with the greatest respect to the variables of TUPEing and state of play, put a stake in the ground, noon today or whenever that is, and tell us what it was on that day, then give us an indication of what's coming afterwards with anything else. That will give us the opportunity to properly scrutinise. Because at the moment,
let's be honest. I don't know if you've got 128 headcount. Well, I do because it tells me here. I don't know if you've got 128 temps on top of that. I've got no idea.
So we will get a report after the meeting, and it will cover those things. Councillor van der Weyer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for coming to speak to us now and in the past, and for providing such a thorough presentation. I feel that we're focusing on the right areas to improve the organisation. Things like culture and leadership in particular, but these aren't things that can be measured sort of on a monthly basis. They're long-term changes. As I understand it, this program, it's had a sort of history before it, but is really responding to the best value notice. And if I read the papers correctly, sort of continues until January next year, which hopefully, I think I'm confident that a lot of what you're doing will have long-term effects. What could we do to ensure that the work is continued and maintained, and monitoring and support for these culture changes beyond January 24? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Hopefully, part of my role coming into the organisation is to help to embed some of these things. So I think it is a process of some of the things that we're doing. It's the constant reinforcing of the values. It's working with the directorates to go to the away days. It's the conferences. It's the staff surveys that should happen every year. They won't stop. And once we've got some of the benchmarks around those staff surveys, it will be monitoring that, and we'll be asking the same questions so that we can see the improvement. So I think absolutely from a HR point of view, we'll be looking at putting in place our people strategy, Kate mentions our workforce sort of planning. So all of those tools will be ongoing all the time, and we will be constantly reviewing those. I will be coming to CMT regularly to talk through the plans. So that's how I'd expect it to be continuing to embed as things go forward.
I don't see any other comments or discussions. So thank you very much for coming today, and obviously for all the work that you're putting into this. We just note this report, so there's no vote taken, but we have noted it. Thanks very much. So now we move to the corporate performance report, and welcome, Jules. Are you presenting the report today? Yeah, excellent.
I am, thank you, Chair. This is the second quarterly corporate performance report for the Combined Authority in the new format set out in the Performance Management Framework. It presents information up to the end of Q2 of this financial year and includes a summary report, a balanced scorecard, a dashboard for each KPI, a dashboard for our most complex programmes and projects, and an update on headline priority activities. A change to the report is the inclusion of two different RAG ratings for performance against direction of travel and performance against target. And it's hoped that this will give a more nuanced understanding of the Combined Authority's performance. For example, on page 64, you can see from the balanced scorecard that metric 27 at the bottom of the page, which is forecast versus budget loss or carried forward in the current financial year, is RAG rated red for direction of travel, but amber for performance against target. This tells you that even though performance has gone in the wrong direction since the last quarter, it is less than 10% below target. Conversely, metric 23, which is number of apprenticeships created by Combined Authority funded investment, is RAG rated green for direction of travel, but red for performance against target. And this tells you that even though it is more than 10% off target, it is going in the right direction. And then if you look across at the dashboard for this metric on page 96, you can see that performance has in fact significantly improved since Q1. And these are just two examples of how the different RAG ratings can be used together to interpret the data. The most complex programmes and projects update starts on page 101 and there have been no changes to the RAG ratings since the Q1 performance report. Further work is planned to refine how we measure, manage and communicate performance. This is described on page 69 and will include incorporation of the new Office for Local Government metrics. Oflog is developing a useful dashboard for these metrics that will enable us to benchmark our performance against other combined authorities. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jules. Obviously, again, a lot of work going on in there. Are there any questions or comments from members on the report? You get an easy ride.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're noting the report, so we don't need to vote on it. So thank you very much, Jules. So now we move to the bus strategy. Oh, Neil's online, is he? Yeah. Okay. So Neil will be presenting that report, please. Tim, are you able to present? Because Neil doesn't seem to be there. Stephen, sorry. Hello, Neil. Can you hear us, Neil?
Great. Yeah, it was my audio connection had just stopped working as you called, so apologies for that.
Okay, if you'd like to present the report, please.
Yeah, thank you. Morning, everybody. Thanks for your time today. So this paper sets out some further recommendations that we've discussed with the Transport and Infrastructure Committee and are due to be taken to the Combined Authority Board on Wednesday this week around the bus strategy, and it has three kind of key sections to it. The first one focuses on the work we've been doing around the bus network review and some further recommendations on services that we've been reviewing through that process. It reminds on the work that we've undertaken previously and then sets out recommendations for 19 services that we've looked for opportunities to improve and makes recommendations for those services. It also identifies a number of new bus services that have been developed through the piece of work, then goes on to set out recommendations around the Bus Service Improvement Plan Plus funding, so BSIP Plus. Then beyond that, sets out some areas of further opportunity and priority for bus investment if further investment was available, and then provides an update on a number of the national schemes that are currently undergoing, the Zebra 2 and National Bus Fare Cap, and a piece of work that the Combined Authority have been undertaking on the bus stop audit to understand the on-street infrastructure. This is part of a programme of work that we've been undertaking over the last 12 months to review the investment into all tendered bus services and then look at other opportunities that the Combined Authority need to develop to improve bus services in general in the context of looking at bus reform, which is a wider piece of work that sits across some of the more short-term activities like the items set out in this paper. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. Members, who wants to start? I know there are questions. Councillor Hassel.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the update. This is one of the more sort of challenging areas, I think, for all members, isn't it? Sort of bus strategy. But just going through some of the reviewed items, I guess my question was quite a simple one, is that when you look at some of the demand responsive travel, certainly for my own constituency in Buckton, I noticed that the cost on many of these routes is really prohibitive. And I just wanted to know why, really. Yeah, I think members have kind of suggested that it would be cheaper to get a taxi, and comments like that. So is this, kind of because we're piloting DRT, that we're doing this because we're trying to learn from it? And when you come to the more wide-ranging strategy, or is it that we're just not getting best value for money? Or alternative answers are acceptable.
Yeah, would you like me to take each question in turn? Is that, yeah, okay. So I guess it's always a complex mix of factors that result in that. So I think the couple of points that you made are true. So it's piloting a scheme is one of the areas. So you're learning about how it best works within a community and looking to make improvements. I think probably one of the factors around not just demand responsive transport, but a lot of the tendered services run is the tendered services are intended to fill gaps in a commercial network where those services aren't commercially viable. That often relates to the fact of lower levels of demand within those locations when there aren't enough people travelling on a regular basis. And then demand responsive transport is then intended to fill the gaps when there just is even lower levels of demand compared to the rest of the network. So I think what you have is providing a service that is looking to fill the gaps in that network with areas of lower levels of demand makes it generally more challenging, whether that be a scheduled service or a demand responsive service. I think we're learning some lessons from demand responsive transport. One of the factors that's within it is that particular trial is carrying the overhead cost of running demand responsive in our area. If we had more demand responsive services, then the booking and the payment app, the application that sits across that would go across a number of contracts rather than being held just against this particular contract that's running at the moment. So that would generally help. I think the experience that we've seen from other places is that things like demand responsive transport are not generally not going to be commercially viable because of the role that they play in the wider network. So there's always a decision to be taken around, is that the right answer and the right investment compared to increasing frequency on more frequent services already? So I think that the task for us is to look at how we get continual improvement in demand responsive transport and then keep reviewing the performance of those services to see if they deliver us a level of connectivity that we're after. I think when we compare it to normal scheduled services, it's probably going to continue to perform slightly worse in terms of a pure cost per passenger journey. Whereas if we can demonstrate that it's providing an important social benefit, then there'll be a decision to weigh up those two factors alongside each other.
Did that cover, or do you want to come back with a follow-up?
Thank you, Chair. Just have one follow-up question. So the cost in demand related transport DRT is that related to the cost of the software then? So if that software was rolled out across the whole region, it would be as cost effective as any other service?
Partially, but I wouldn't say that it would take it all the way to be as cost effective as other services. But we are contributing to the cost of that software and the solution that sits behind it to run that service. But it doesn't fully account for the difference.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smart.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So, I mean, it's a good point, and it requires scrutiny. But I think there's a sort of wider consideration than just a financial consideration here of social value. So, I mean, I'll use a couple of analogies that we've discussed in my political group in Cambridge before now. And analogy is always a bit of a tricky place to go to because not everyone agrees with the particular examples. But for example, with council houses, with all authorities, if the number of council houses falls below a critical number, then it's almost unviable to continue to operate them because the cost per unit goes up. So that's one. Second one, perhaps more easy to understand, is more obvious, is toilets. So, many authorities don't have many toilets, if any at all. We do in Cambridge. We continue to support them. We think public toilets are a good thing, have social value. but the cost per toilet visit can be quite high, compared with, say, a 20p charge. I can't recount all the costs, but they were certainly much higher than 20p to the authority. But it was seen that that was a cost worth bearing for the local taxpayer because it provided social value. I think in this case, this is what's being provided here. This is social value, and there is also. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it seems to me it's quite a complex area. If you start a route up, then it might not be very well supported straight away, but then might get better supported as time goes on. But anyway, there will be people who will be basically stuck in their homes unless they've got this capacity to travel, and this authority is providing that. So I go back to my first point. It is something we need to scrutinise, definitely, but it is also something we need to bear in mind the sort of wider context and especially that social value.
So did you have a question there, or was that a comment you wanted to?
I started off saying through you, Chair, it was really a response to Councillor Hassel and that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the your analysis of the DRT trial so far, I mean, I agree with lots of the comments made by the previous two councillors. If I have a concern, well, first of all, I should say that I've actually tried to use the service a number of times and not successfully been able to make a booking. Perhaps based on your analysis, that's because I wasn't travelling from St Neots to St Neots, which seems to be where a lot of the journeys are taking place. You mentioned that you might be considering limiting the ability for that, but my concern is presumably ferrying people around St Neots, while that's not really what the service was intended to do, is relatively cost effective. And so, whereas presumably ferrying people around, rural villages is less cost effective. And I'm slightly concerned that you have these twin objectives of not making this a St Neots taxi service, while at the same time also reducing the cost per passenger. It would seem to me that those two things are potentially in conflict. Am I misunderstanding this, or is there some way of squaring that circle?
Did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, good question and observation. So where there's higher demand, there'll be higher utilisation. I think the analysis that plays into that is there an alternative? So I think the question around the network development and the role of the DRT is to fill the gaps where there isn't an alternative. So I think the comparison with St Neots is that there are other ways for people to make those journeys, and demand responsive is a very convenient way to make those kind of trips because it is effectively door-to-door type operation. So that makes it a very attractive choice. But actually it means that it's not filling the holes in the network that it's designed to fill, in that providing those connections to the more rural locations is the purpose of that option. So I think by moving it into a location where there might be lower demand, it's actually filling the gap that it's intended to fill, rather than almost over providing a service when there are other options available. And I think those are the kinds of policy choices to make around the types of network to provide in different types of locations to try and make sure there is connectivity for as many communities as possible. But it's the right kind of analysis identified between the choice of cost effectiveness and social value, or connecting communities where there might not be other provision.
Thank you for that. So have you assessed if this proposed limiting journeys, so saying that journeys can't start and end in St Neots, have you assessed what impact that would have on cost per passenger?
We haven't assessed specifically the difference on cost per passenger, partly because we'd be redesigning the cost of the service as well. We haven't reached the point at which we know the service design element of the cost to complete that analysis.
Thank you. I wonder if I may, I mean, I think, this is obviously a trial, we're still experimenting, and obviously, as you said, if we expand into more DRT areas, then, costs will start getting shared and costs will come down, and I think that's to be welcomed. But if I was to put an alternative suggestion to you, in a way, would it not be sensible to have if we suppose that, say, doing door-to-door service in St Neots, while it's not the original intention of it, could nevertheless be helping to shoulder quite a lot of the costs of this service, should those not be retained and used to cross-subsidise its rural activities, provided enough capacity can be supplied? And if it's cannibalising from kind of scheduled routes, then maybe it's the scheduled routes that need to be reviewed and not restrict this to something that's going to be even more expensive to subsidise than it is at the moment. I'm not necessarily saying that's the right answer, but that would be another way that you could go. And I just wonder in what detail we've compared those two potential approaches.
Yeah, so we can take those points away as part of the work that we'll be doing to look at the options of changing the demand responsive service. So there are different options for us to look at in the way that is improved for the future role of demand responsive transport. So if I take those points back, and we're happy to provide an update in terms of where we get to and those considerations, if that's useful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Griffin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the officer for this report. It's very interesting. There's one question I would like to, I'd like to ask a question about paragraph 8.1 that talks about the environmental and climate change implications. It says there that when effectively utilized, buses could be an important tool here. But obviously, that's not always the case, right? I mean, we could have a diesel belching bus, carrying on average a single passenger, let's say, and actually it would be a negative impact. And it seems like this is something we could actually measure. We have data on the buses, we have data on passenger numbers and so on. We could actually quantify this and keep track of whether or not we're contributing to a problem or actually mitigating a problem here. So it seems like this is a perfect example. So do we have plans to actually get some numbers attached to this assertion that's being made at 8.1? Thank you.
So we haven't undertaken any assessment of the climate impacts of buses in general. Within the LTCP, there will be some assessment of the quantification of carbon. What I could do is look into that, the assessment that sits behind that in terms of the assessment of carbon, and see if there is analysis of the role of buses to support the narrative. It could be a useful way to help support investment in buses in general as well. So I think it's a good point for us to look at from the technical work that's been doing to play into the broader narrative around the positive role buses can take. So while we don't have it at the moment, I can find out if it's been captured within some of the research as part of the LTCP work.
Thank you. That would be appreciated.
Yeah, it was just a really important question, and 2 points. I think just to add, clearly, if we can get more people travelling on buses, there's fewer people travelling in cars, which is a huge benefit. That may not be applicable in all parts of the area, but certainly in the cities. And the second, we have worked with Stagecoach and the Greater Cambridge Partnership to get the Zebra buses into Cambridge. We're committed to doing the same in Peterborough, and through bus reform, one of the priorities in the bus strategy agreed earlier this year is to move towards zero emission buses as quickly as we can. So I think there are parallel running work streams to address the environmental opportunities that there are from buses.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you for going through you, Chair. Thanks for the report. I'm going to be very parochial, but I think it's because I know the area and it gives me a greater scope for what I think is a wider issue. So on the DRT, I'm very pleased to see on page 112 that the little village of Isleham, in which I live, is finally getting a mention. The DRT looks like there's a potential opportunity here for a trial, etc., etc. But Councillor Griffin, to my right, mentioned I know it was Councillor Atkin mentioned the door-to-door aspect, which you mentioned, Neil. So if somebody from Soham phones up for a DRT, but somebody from Isleham and somebody from Prickwillow are also within sort of 20 minutes of each other all phone up, is that one sweeping journey to pick up all three, or is that one journey, aka a bus that's running as a taxi? That's my first question. So if we can have an answer to that, I can then hopefully go on to my second and main one.
Yeah, so the intention with demand responsive transport is to aggregate journeys together, so it would become one journey for three people. and that the role of the technology is to find ways to reduce the number of backwards and forwards trips and collect as many people as possible. There are always some decisions where it might make sense, in your example, to pick up 2 of those people, take that, and then pick up the third separately, and that will be a calculation done by the software to make that choice about the most efficient way to accept those journeys.
Okay, well, that clears the first bit up, which takes me on to a more modified point. There's a point that Steve Cox has just made. The 2 main objectives of a successful bus implementation is, 1, to help those people with no transport, as Councillor Smart was alluding to get from A to B, make them movable, give them the opportunities that other car owners do. The second, and probably equal opportunity, is to get people out of vehicles, because the service is that good that they're not going to take a car, they'll jump on a bus and they'll go on it. Just using this as a route, I can't think of a single person that's living in Soham that's going to call a DRT if they think it's going to possibly go back through Isleham and across through Prickwillow. You know, if they're living in Soham, they've got a 112 bus, which is a Stevenson's bus, which is going to come through fairly regularly anyway. So I'm confused as to why geographically, and I appreciate this may have come from East Cambs that is not of your making, but I'm just confused geographically that we're going from Burwell, Fordham, Isleham, Prickwillow, Ely. I can understand, but once you throw Soham into that loop, you're going completely off. And Soham is my county ward, but it doesn't make sense to double back on yourself to go back through a village. And then the third point, and one that Steve will know very well from his previous role, is, and I did say this in our pre-meeting, the last thing in the world that I would like to do was be a passenger on a bus going down the Prickwillow Road, which is a peat damaged road and under constant review from Cambridgeshire County Council, that is actually getting close to being non-serviceable for a 4x4 vehicle, let alone a standard diesel operated bus. So we've got to make sure these things join up. Great in principle. I can go back to Isleham Parish Council, tell them the good news that you're going to be part of a trial. As soon as I tell them and the bus is going to go down the Prickwillow Road, they're going to go, well, I ain't going to do that. Nausea is the least of their problems. So I'm being very honest about it. You know, if you want to check it out, just do a Google search and look at nauseating roads. I think it was an article recently, and there's a video on there of people on there complaining about it. So we've got to get these linked up with the highways authorities and with ourselves. So I think we've got to work with this again. And I implore this in every decision you guys make. Every decision you guys make. People sit around this table as representatives of local areas. Okay, I'm just imploring you to use this and use the local areas. Speak to people, understand what's going on. That little bit of information there, that seems. I mean, Councillor Brown's in the room. He's a representative for Burwell, right? I'm sure Councillor Brown's got a lot of sympathy for what I'm saying on the route. You wouldn't go from Burwell through to Soham and then back out again to Fordham and Isleham. You just wouldn't do that. So why would you do that on a bus?
Thank you, Chair. And Neil may want to come in. Really helpful comments, and we'll certainly take those back. We haven't finalised the route for a potential DRT in East Cambs. We have been working closely with the District Council on the options that have been put forward. So we'll take that feedback directly and shape that as we develop that before it comes back to scrutiny and to the board in January. On the second point, absolutely aware of the peat damaged roads and, you know, from a combined authority perspective, the economic impacts of rural isolation that could exacerbate. And we are looking through the MTFP process of anything we can do to support the County Council in its work to look at the economic impact, but also potential innovative solutions that there might be, recognising that it is a big challenge, as you quite rightly say.
I think, if I may, I think it highlights, and with all respect to Councillor Smart, who puts a very good argument forward for bus travel in Cambridge. It is, I mean, I wouldn't want your job for an awful lot of money, I can tell you, because the bus travel in Cambridge is so different to the bus travel in St Neots that was mentioned, to the bus travel required out in the Fenland villages. It is just so different all the way around. My complaint, really, and I'd make this as an observation, is our starting point is a one size fits all. That cannot be the end game. We must have different services, different levels of service for different needs right across, and not lose sight of the fact that we want people out of cars because the bus service is that good, and we want to service people and make them mobile to counter social isolation and more. You know, some of these rural people haven't really recovered from COVID and the lockdown. You know, they've embedded new behaviours, and we've got to get them out and mobile. And I think that's a big part of your job.
Councillor Hay?
Thank you, Chair. I apologise first of all for my late arrival, and you'll forgive me if my voice keeps on going. I wanted to ask about the financial implications under 5.1. It tells us what the budget was for 23-24, which, amongst others, included the mayoral precept and the bus service grant and bus recovery grant. Then goes on to say the bus recovery grant is not expected to be available for 23-24. Is this a typo? Should it be 24-25? It also goes on to say that the recommendation for the 19 bus service contracts for 12 months from April 24 is forecast to require further funding. Are we going to get any extra funding from central government, or is the intention that the mayoral precept will be increased to cover any shortfall in the bus service funding?
Is that Neil or Steve?
I'm happy to come back. Thank you on the first point on 5.1. Yeah, correct. That's a typo. That should be 24-25, so the coming financial year. And then around the point of additional funding, so the BSIP plus or Bus Service Improvement Plan plus funding is the allocation that the government have made relatively recently of £4.6 million in total, £2.3 million that can be allocated towards supporting the recommendations in this paper and wider activities around bus services. So there is some additional funding in the short term from government. There is a need to continue conversations with government around investment into bus services through the Bus Service Improvement Plan process.
Yeah, thank you. And so Neil's covered. So the network review, as he rightly says, is based on the assumptions that we can make about the budget available for next year. You'll see from the papers for the board on Wednesday there are MTFP proposals in there. There's a question about the precept, which will be debated at the board, and where to go with that. But at the moment, this network review is based on the budget that we are confident is available for next year, as the review was done over the course of the autumn.
Councillor van der Veer.
Thank you. So one of the bus routes being reviewed is the only bus that serves my ward, and is a vital link really for a number of people. Like Councillor Grosswack, I'm just going to raise some general points from my knowledge of this rather than talk about ward specific issues. A couple of questions. So one is, this is on the review pages, page 124. The cost per passenger there is the average is over £20. My recollection of sort of from a good while ago that it was significantly less than that. And certainly from sort of just observing the bus myself, the usage does seem to have declined significantly in the last 3-4 years. I was wondering whether there's any sort of overall data on the effects of the pandemic on bus usage, in particular the subsidised services, and what expectations are around that. Because for bus services to do their job, people need to be able to depend on them, and having stable routes is part of that. Obviously, if people just aren't using them, then they need to be reviewed. I think the sort of the principles of the review set out here seem very good, combining with another route and maintaining the essentials of getting people to work in education at peak times is very good. So I was just my sort of second question is around that process. Is that's sort of something you're doing now with a view to revising the routes for April, and sort of is part of your review thinking about trying to achieve some level of longer term stability, so that then people can sort of organise their lives around it as much as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the point around stability is a kind of reliability as well. The point of people know that there are services that they can rely on. I think in terms of impact of passengers, as particularly associated to COVID, it's been consistently across all services. There's been a challenge. I think particularly for the over 60s group of users, that they've nationally, this isn't a local issue, generally to return to bus more slowly than other age groups. And particularly for the types of tendered services that are provided are often those that those communities might rely on but haven't returned to as quickly as other age groups. So that's probably seen a bit of an impact in terms of the cost per passenger journey of some of the services that we support. And I guess we support the other comments made in terms of the importance of making sure that services are retained and then communicated. I think the other element for the combined authority to consider is how we work with you and with others to make sure that these services are promoted locally within their communities and are really well used, whether particularly for that group or just more generally by the community.
Thank you very much. It's appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Hassel.
I just wondered if one of you could say a few words about the future strategy. It feels very much to me as though we're sort of moving. There's a huge amount of complexity. I think Councillor Goldsack talked about the difference between same as the Fens, St Neots, and Cambridge, and then I think there are sort of kind of assumptions with DRT that it's serving rural communities, and sort of if we divert it into the rural communities, then everything's going to be fine if you're trying to get into St Neots or whatever. But the reality is that our overall public transport system is inadequate pretty much wherever you are, perhaps unless you're in central Cambridgeshire. So having sort of done a little bit of process re-engineering in the past, I always think it's really, really good to start with your 2B model rather than trying to look at your as-is model, because the as-is just gives you too many constraints and really primarily constrains your thinking. So if either Steve or Neil, if you could say a few words on and maybe we need to be looking much wider than buses and how people are going to be traveling. You've got to take the global warming into account as well. So there's a lot of moving points. But sorry for the long-winded question, but I wanted to give you a context.
Shall I kick off, Chair? I think it's a really, really important question, and some of the points that Councillor Goldsack was making about distinguishing around different parts of the area are really important. In parallel with the network review, members will be aware we're also carrying out a bus reform major piece of work as well, which is looking at the case for franchising or enhanced partnership. The OBC, the outline business case for that, is being audited now, and the plan is to bring that to the board in January, and that will take the starting point that we agreed at the board in March, which was the bus strategy, which is now reflected also in the LTCP, which is all the things that have been spoken about this morning. So, addressing rural isolation, enabling people to get access to services, critical education, health, other services to work. These are the underpinning principles in the bus strategy that we want to make sure are addressed. And then it's about running a service that is easy to use, easy to understand, accessible, affordable, safe, and has a frequency of service that makes it attractive for people to want to use. And that's then you do then get people out of their cars or able to travel in a way that they're not able to travel at the moment. So there is an underpinning strategy. There is a narrative that we want to deliver. We just have to work with what we have at the moment through the bus network review to make the best of the subsidised network, working with operators to make sure the commercial network is addressing those priorities in the strategy, but then look ahead to what bus reform could do and a different model of running the bus system that will help us to deliver those objectives to even greater effect. And that will be coming back to scrutiny, I'm sure, on the 29th of January and then to the board on the 31st.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do have a question, but just indulge for a moment. That I think Councillor Hassel just touched on something we talked about some time ago. There seems to be a sticking plaster approach here about what we're doing with transport, but there is a lack 3 years in now of any transport policy whatsoever in terms of overarching for this combined authority. And by the way, I don't wish to denigrate the work of officers because they're working with what they have and what they've got. So buses seem to be all and end all, but it isn't. What about light rail? What about opening up the transport network to other operators? And again, I would advise the combined authority to look into the traffic commissioner's role in this and what they could do. Be bold, perhaps, like they've been in Manchester. Different political, party to me as such, but at least they're doing something that's different. And I don't see us doing anything different here. And also, is it he who shouts the loudest is getting this money? It's over £1 million worth just in this. And am I right that we're at a £7 million subsidy total, set to increase again to deliver on these proposals in the bus network? And if we're relying on BSIP money, we've got to up our game. I'm not saying anything, by the way, I haven't said at board level, because we didn't get any money. And I know why, because I spoke to the bus minister. Quote, unquote, you weren't ambitious enough. I don't know if that's changed. I don't know where we're at. So my question, Chair, is where does this end? Because just to stand still and put in some extra options, which it says in the paper, are we approaching 7 million overall? Is the £12 figure benchmarked at what the subsidised would be? Because when is enough enough? Because with some buses running at £95 a passenger. So I'd just like to know the final number. And Neil, is it going to increase? Because this is this year. Where are we next year? And the year after, where's it going? Because I don't see any vision here in this transport policy.
So, Steve, you want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you. The BSIP first time around, I think it was 2 years ago, and it wasn't successful. The majority of transport authorities that put a BSIP forward weren't successful either. That's not an excuse for ours not being, but we are working very closely with DFT to make sure that next time it will be successful. And we were successful in getting £4.6 million worth of BSIP plus money that we are using to support the network as we have it at the moment. The budget for next year we've spoken about, so the network review has been based on the budget we think will be available at £7.5 million. The BSIP Plus for next year we're using to help in case there are additional costs that are incurred that we want to and need to address to support that network into next year. The LTCP, I think, sets out a very clear overarching plan for transport, and that will be returning to the board on Wednesday. The bus strategy, I think, earlier in the year, Councillor Fitzgerald may recall, was agreed in March, also sets out high ambitions for buses. The wider opportunities of transport are things that we will take forward once the LTCP is approved through the implementation planning for the LTCP into next year, and those plans are being put together now. So I think, and just with the Traffic Commissioner reference, myself and the Mayor and others met with the Traffic Commissioner last week to talk through the plans that we have for bus reform, and that was a very constructive discussion. So yeah, there is a wider vision for transport. It is in the LTCP. it will always evolve, it will always move forward, and we'll make sure we stay ahead of that as we go forward. We're one of 4 transport authorities that will have an LTCP in place ahead of the guidance that we've been waiting some time for from government. Well, we will be well placed for bidding for funding for projects on the back of having an up-to-date LTCP. Thank you, Chair.
As I said, no disrespect to officers. The word perhaps I shall use there, and I'm not saying these things don't exist, but they're not that visionary. I haven't seen the vision for a transport, policy, and that's from a political perspective, not from an officer perspective. That's what I'm talking about. And we're 3 years in.
I see no other. Oh, sorry, Councillor Smart. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, I have my hand up a while back. I think I do it myself as chair. Don't worry about it. So I'll be brief because I know time's getting on. 3 quick things. So firstly, Councillor Griffin, I think, made a good point about carbon. I've said it myself in lots of different meetings that we count cash but not carbon, and some people would prefer to count carbon. I understand the argument. There's a strong argument that we do count cash. That's what taxpayers are interested in to a certain extent, I think, anyway. But I think, evidence would be good for a statement like 8.1. And I think Councillor Griffin says that, and that's what we really do need. I know Bath University did a lot of work years ago on counting carbon, and we've moved on since then. It's not difficult. Although I think Councillor Griffin's example of one person on one bus for one bus outing or something is probably a bit extreme, and that would be totally off the scale in terms of cost, I would have thought. But and also just on that, just briefly, part of the social value on buses is also that we all get together on a bus. We all chat potentially. So that's an important thing as well, I think. There is such a thing as society. So on Councillor Goldsack's point, he makes the difference between Cambridge and the surrounding area. I don't really make that difference myself. I think Cambridge and the surrounding areas are all connected. And he took me back a few years to when I worked in Patworth for a couple of years with Disability Cambridgeshire and went on a Whippet bus to Patworth every day and got a headache every day. And that was on a decent road, reasonably so. So I understand your point about the damaged roads. And the thing with the damaged roads is it's Tory cuts. They've cut the bloody. Sorry, apologise. They've cut the. Yeah. Sorry. They've cut so heavily that our authority, Cambridgeshire County Council Transport Authority, cannot now afford to mend the roads. But they can mend them, but they can't relay them. They haven't got the money for it. So we're in a bad place on that. Finally, Councillor Fitzgerald has asked political questions, but we don't have the politician here today. We don't have Councillor Anna Smith. She is the one that should be answering these questions, not the officer. So just a point for you, Chair, on that. Thank you.
So I'm pleased to say Councillor Smith, of course, did come to our last meeting, and we'll have the Mayor at our next meeting. So there will be members available to ask questions of. I think the officers did agree that they were going to do some work on the carbon and report back to us on that. So I think that's covered. Any other comments, discussions? Councillor Fitzgerald.
I just want to be clear because I don't want officers feeling awkward. I didn't ask the officers political questions. I asked a question about money to the officers. I made the political statement, so I don't want Steve or Neil to feel awkward. They wouldn't comment on that. So the question was about money, and it was £7.5 million that we are heading for in subsidy, which will be presumably part funded, part taxpayer. Precept, I should
point
say.
made,
Sorry.
point
Thanks.
taken. Any other? Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, I thank Councillor Smart for the analysis, and I get that. I think where it falls down is if you choose your 16 to 18 college to be Long Road or Hills Road, and you live in Isleham, you can't get there unless you drive a car. That's the bottom line. You cannot get there unless your parents get you from A to B or A to B, then on to college. To pick up a service, right? I don't believe there's anywhere in Cambridge that applies. You might have to wait a little bit, and you might get clogged up by busy roads, but there is a service. We're talking about areas, and that is representative of Cambridgeshire. That's my point. I'm talking about my village, but that's representative of Cambridgeshire. So I think that was where I was coming from. From it, it's different, but appreciate what you were saying.
Thank you. So we've got some information coming back from officers. We've got some more reports coming to this committee in January. So with that, we're asked to note this. So thank you very much for presenting and answering our questions. And the report is noted. Thank you. And now we move on to the corporate plan and medium-term update, and that's you, is it?
Myself and able assisted.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. Myself and Kate will be presenting it. Thank you as well to those members who made themselves available for the budget scrutiny training session last Wednesday. It was very much appreciated, and I hope it was very useful. Sorry?
We were thrilled.
I'm sure. Given that you've given that time over, I will pass over to Kate to talk a bit more about the corporate strategy and be brief in my part on the medium-term financial plan.
Good afternoon again. Members of the committee will recall at the meeting in September, we outlined the approach to the refresh of the corporate strategy and the development of the medium-term financial plan, and outlined the process that we'd be moving through. The paper going to board later this week in terms of the corporate strategy just highlights that it is a light touch refresh of the corporate strategy, and that is because we are in January of this year the board adopted a 2023 to 2025 corporate strategy, a transitional strategy. So we are in the first year of delivering that strategy. So the vision that was adopted at the time will still remain as part of this refresh. The intention is that the strategic vision of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough being a prosperous and sustainable place remains. The proposal as part of this refresh is also that those strategic priorities that were in that adopted strategic plan also remain. So the focus on achieving good growth, increasing connectivity, delivering ambitious skills and employment opportunities, and enabling resilient communities, that headline strategic priorities also remain. But as part of the refresh, so these are you can see these in the board papers, so kind of page 250 onwards in the board papers. When we talk about the refresh of the corporate strategy, what we're talking about is revisiting what we've delivered so far in the first, whatever it is, 8 months of that corporate strategy, undertaking kind of a review of the wider political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental aspects. And again, in the paper going to the board, you can see where we've considered some of those drivers and some of those things that we need to consider both at a national level, regional level, and as an organisation. And ultimately, coming out from this refresh of the strategy, whilst the headline levels stay the same, what is felt to be really important, and indeed following feedback from this committee, I think in June of this year, was the need to make the corporate strategy more accessible. So, i.e., who are we? What are we delivering? What have we achieved? How are we kind of measuring our performance? So you've already heard from Jules today. We've got the performance reporting cycle in there. So as part of the strategy, we'll be wanting to update the document that went to the board in January of this year, so that it is absolutely much clearer about what we're delivering, linking that back into some of those metrics that Jules is now sharing. So a bit of a top-down, bottom-up. But the reason that we've undertaken the refresh of the strategy is very much in line with best practice. It's the looking at what we're focusing on, and then ultimately how the resources are being deployed. At which point I'll hand over to Rob.
Thanks. So I'll just briefly go over how we've got to where we are today and what's in front of the committee. So over the last 3 months, officers have been working with the members and our constituent councils to first recost our existing commitments, because the budget was last approved in January and things change, new grants come online, inflation forecasts changed just last week. And that's to give us a baseline which allows us to see what there is then to invest in new initiatives. And what this draft budget's setting out and focusing on is what can we use those investments for against the strategic objectives in the corporate strategy to better deliver on our objectives. The committee have 3 opportunities to scrutinise this draft budget between now and when it's considered by the board for approval in January. The second is a specific workshop on it in January. That will be during the consultation period. The committee's a statutory consultee on this budget, so that's a chance to really dig into it. You'll be supported by officers to answer your questions, and that gives you the opportunity to come up with your official response to the consultation on the draft budget. The third session then is just before the board, after the close of the consultation, and you'll get the results of the consultation more widely to give you that opportunity to see what people have said, yourselves as well included, as the business board, the public, and the constituent authorities. So that leaves us with this first session where you can focus on whether there are questions you as a committee have that the board should consider before taking a decision on what to consult on with the public over the next couple of months leading into that final draft budget in January. There are 3 focuses that we had when putting this budget together. The first and driest is the one required by law, affordability. As the funding tables within the board pack show, the Combined Authority has a balanced medium-term financial plan, not just a budget for next year, but actually balanced across the next 4 years of the medium term. This, of course, gets more challenging as time moves on and requires the Combined Authority to continually operate with efficiency as a central tenet. While there's a specific efficiency target in there, £500,000, underlying that, there's a greater pressure across 2 key areas. The first is our core funding, what we got through the devolution deal of £20 million a year. Since that was agreed in 2016, it's now worth 40% less each year than it was at the start. And so we're continually delivering with less resource, just like most of our local authority partners. And the second, and one that's been discussed already, is around transport. The Combined Authority has a transport levy that's charged on Peterborough City Council and Cambridge County Council to cover the responsibilities around passenger transport. But of course, the more we put that up, the more we just put pressures on those 2 authorities that certainly have their own troubles. And so we've kept that historically to do a 2% rise each year rather than the inflationary index we're allowed to do. By doing that, it actually results in a nearly £2 million pressure over the next 4 years that we're addressing within the budget rather than increasing that pressure on our constituent authorities. The second is, of course, alignment with the strategic objectives. As Kate's just spoken about, the objectives should be familiar to us all. And indeed, the structure of the report itself in the appendices, we've said, here are our new investment ideas, and those are badged against each of our strategic objectives to show that alignment. And then finally, just to bring to the committee's attention, there's a new phase in the Combined Authority in this budget. Whereas historically we've had devolved funds specifically for transport, housing and business growth, those have all fallen away or are ending soon. And so what the board's now having to grapple with is the money we've got left is at our discretion, or their discretion, I should say. It can be used on anything. And so they're having to decide where to allocate those resources against those priorities rather than saying we've got transport money, we'll spend it on transport. And that can be seen in the increase in the number of funds being set aside, like the climate fund and the transport fund. The active transport fund. And that's all underpinned by the new single assurance framework that we've had the first Combined Authority to get that signed off by government this week. And that includes the governance underlay for making best practice decisions on how to invest those funds. If those funds are approved, they'll sit there, not allocated to specific projects yet, and the projects then have to come forward in response to those funds' existence and make their case in line with the single assurance framework to make the case for that funding, rather than simply doing it on a who shouts loudest or first come, first served basis. That's really all I wanted to bring the committee's attention to. The committee's asked to note this and then consider if there are any questions you want the board to consider on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions or comments from members?
Do you think it's wise to stick to 2%? So I've made this argument many times in many different meetings before. I spoke about carbon just now. I mean, carbon is a unit of carbon is a unit of carbon is a unit of carbon. A unit of money is a different thing altogether tomorrow. A loaf of bread costs more next year, probably, than this year, unless we have deflation. So money is a medium of exchange. It's not an absolute thing. So if you stick to 2% and not use the real change, then you're effectively making a cut. So any comment?
Happy to. I wouldn't use the word cut purely because the medium-term financial plan is on the basis that we're going to continue to support the bus strategy level of services. And effectively, the combined authority is prioritising resources to support that service from its discretionary funds to save having to increase beyond that 2%. So the intention with the medium-term financial plan is certainly not cuts to the bus network. It just requires greater resource from elsewhere.
You've misunderstood me. I don't mean a cut to the network. I mean a cut to the incoming money. The two. If it's 2% or 7%, 7% is going to bring more funds in. If it's 2% less, so that's what I meant. The difference, the 5% difference. That's the cut I referred to. I'm not talking about you being a Tory cutting person. I'm talking about you meaning that you make a change by sticking to 2%, which is not the real figure, is it? It's a pretend figure. It's not actually what the difference is. So inflation is X, but but X does not equal 2%.
Thank you. Apologies for misunderstanding. The levy is set by the Combined Authority Board, but representatives on that board of both the Peterborough City Council and Cambridge County Council have a veto as it's transport funding. And so it is effectively set in negotiation with the councils who pay it each year. The 2% is one that's then been reached in discussion with those councils as something they can afford within their budgets and in light of the resource available to the Combined Authority. Does that more accurately answer the question?
So I think in the percentage is a political decision really, rather than an officer decision. If we, as an overview and scrutiny, want to ask the board to consider that percentage, that is open to us.
I think your point, Chair, is half right. I disagree with the other half. I'd say that that 2%, because it's 2%, the number 2, is something I've talked about with officers at Cambridge City Council over a number of years. And there was a period of time, quite a period of time, when 2% was seen as the usual inflation figure per year for authorities, and that was it was used in budgets and et cetera, et cetera. So that 2% doesn't come from nowhere; it comes from that place. And so to stick to 2% is not strictly a political decision; it's a functional decision as well, I believe. And I think it's a wrong decision because I think if you're going to make a political decision, it needs to be labelled as such and needs to be said that this is all we can afford and this is what we're going to pay. But to stick to a figure that seems to imply that that is the rate of change, when it is not, is I think something that needs scrutinising, and that's why I'm scrutinising it now. I believe that, as I said to the officer, money is a medium of exchange. It's not an absolute thing, and you can't expect to buy one loaf of, in economics, A-level economics, you can't expect to buy a loaf of bread this year for the same price as last year or next year. They're different. They're different prices for the same thing. And so to imagine that 2% somehow covers that problem, there is a bit of politics in it because it means that the authorities pay less. But that's not really the answer to this question, I don't think. I think that if you're setting up by funding it from other budgets, which is what you've effectively said, what you're creating a system that's potentially unsustainable. You have a budget. If you can pull that money from somewhere else, then all well and good, fine, lovely. But actually, that money should be coming from the right place and going to the right place, and it seems to not be happening that way at the moment. But maybe it's a small amount of money in the total wider scheme of things, and it's not that big a deal. But I'm just making the point because I think it's an important point to me, and I've made it so many times in so many meetings with officers and so on. because there is that presumption, there has been that presumption, and 2% is what it is. And it seems that the way it's happening here is it still seems to be the assumption, but we're living in a cost of living crisis, for God's sake, with double-digit inflation. So where has that come from? We do not have that now. We have a different situation. Inflation is falling, but it's been very high and it's still high.
So do you want to come back on that? Yeah.
Just to say that the 2% isn't an assumption that's never talked about or challenged. The board members are presented at the several times throughout the cycle, updates on where the MTFP is, what the key questions are, and one of the elements on funding is what do we assume in our draft budget the change in the transport levy will be. So it is something that has been considered by the board in their not unofficial deliberations. Thank you. Their briefing sessions. It's not something that's never talked about or not discussed. It's an understood lever that the combined authority has that the members are well aware of and consider when taking those decisions.
So Councillor Smart, are you proposing that we ask the board to reconsider whether 2% is the right amount?
Well, I didn't caveat what I said, but I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I'm just making the point that I've made as before in other meetings about this percentage thing, and I've heard that argument so many times before. I find it very frustrating that people seem to assume that £1 is the same this year, last year, and next year, but it's not. And I think that needs to be borne in mind to make budgets sustainable. I think everyone can understand that, can't they? But I'm not asking what you just said, no, but I'm just making the point. But if they want to take it into account, then great.
Okay, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Not to labour this, but it's very, very, very simple. This sticking plaster approach is what the problem is, because it does come back to public finances. It doesn't matter how you're funding it, so you're going to fund it through precept, the shortfall. Now, whether Peterborough City Council or the County Council paid, whether it's 7% or 2%. So if for some reason there was a recommendation for 7%, that means I've got less to spend on children's services in terms of our overall budget when we come to do that budget. There's less on adult social care because our money is finite money. So if we put more money into the transport pot, it's got to come from somewhere. And we're already maxed out on council tax. You can't magic up more money. But the mayor is choosing last year to do a precept, and he's increasing the precept this year to make up the shortfall. Because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Peterborough City Council have the veto you referred to. So if there was a proposal to move it to 7%, it would just get vetoed because the authority cannot afford the 7%. But it might be able to keep up with inflation. And that's the difference. Because the money, if it goes into one pot, it's got to come out of another. So the pot is still public money in the wider circle. Think of it like that. It doesn't matter who's paying it. It's still public money.
So am I right in thinking that's a comment rather than a question?
It was in response to my good friend on my right here. Hopefully help him understand that a little bit better.
Councillor Atkins. Councillor Hassel.
Yeah, I just want to say I think what is quite dangerous, particularly as you said earlier on, around the 20 million that the combined authority appeared is not index linked. So every year that gets less and less. So I think that I don't know whether speaking on behalf of other committee members or not. I think the recommendation to the board is that any strategy which actually reduces the income, whether it's just moving things around or budgets around, I don't think we should be supporting, because ultimately that doesn't, if you take the example where the government sets a cap on council tax and then we don't put up our council tax to that cap, is effectively that's damaged many local authorities. And so I guess my word of caution is that we just need to be really, really careful. And this is more generic than just a transport budget, because I sort of take the previous comments is that around where the money would it might get vetoed or whatever. But I think as a rule of thumb is that we should take into account inflation and where we can. I think we should try and ensure that we can provide the same level of service that we did previously, and therefore that probably means that we need to take in more revenue.
Thank you, and that's an entirely valid point. What the MTFP shows is that over the next 4 years, after looking at anticipated inflation, looking at inflation impact on our projects, we are anticipating to have sufficient money to deliver those services over the next 4 years. However, long term, the impact of inflation will absolutely hit the combined authority. We do not have a sustainable funding solution with government as it stands today. And that's something that combined authorities across the country are wrestling with. And the move through trailblazer devolution deals and hopefully future devolution deals with government is something that we're really focused on, and lobbying government for a more sustainable solution, be that retention of business rates locally rather than it going back to central government or other index linked funds potentially. And we're encouraged by the noise out of all of the parties' conferences this year. They've all talked about combined authorities being the future. They've all talked about further devolution. Admittedly, a little light on fiscal devolution, in my opinion, but a lot of talk about that being very important. And we'll be engaging with the current government and whoever the next government is to try and agree something that is more sustainable in that long term. But in the medium term, over the next 4 years, we believe we can support the level of service set out in the budget.
Thank you, Joe. So to come back, so to summarize, what you're saying is that in the medium term, you think we're okay, and we are. I'm trying to think of it. The right way of saying it is that we are hopeful that in the long term, with devolution, we will resolve the inflationary index-linked issues. Thanks.
Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Just to be clear on the 7%, that was just a figure that came to mind. I mean, it was a random figure, but it came to mind because that was the figure that the government set on the cap on council housing rent increases last year. You know, that was a significant matter, probably more important in that context than possibly in this context. But the other thing to say, which I never mentioned, which should be said, is that compound interest is said to be, by some people, the eighth wonder of the world. And, you know, every lack of increase that you get one year carries forward forever. So you've lost it. So that's really the crux of the matter. Really, it's not just 1 year; it's forever.
Thank you. I see no other questions or comments, so we're asked to note this point. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming, and the report is noted. So now we move on to the Combined Authority Board agenda, and this is our opportunity to ask any questions, make any comments, to go back to the board before they meet on Wednesday. It is potentially also an opportunity for any of the rapporteurs who feel that there's relevant input to raise that as well. So any comments, questions on the board agenda? Okay, well, we're asked to note that. So I think that's noted. Thank you. So then, appointment of a skills rapporteur. As I said earlier, Andy Cole's standing down. Councillor Cole's standing down means that we need to replace him with a skills rapporteur, and I'm hoping there's a volunteer.
Yes, Chair, there is.
Excellent. Any other volunteers apart from Councillor Griffin? Councillor Gols.
I don't know if this will help or hinder. I'm happy either way. But having taken on the the rapporteur role for environment, I'd be very happy to swap that to take on the skills one if somebody wants to take on the environment one. So I'll leave that on the table if that's an option. I'm fine, because as Councillor Hassel and I have discussed, nothing's happened with that yet. We haven't heard a single thing or an update, but we're going to take that forward.
So I think let's keep it simple for now. If you want to talk outside the meeting and bring back a different decision to the next meeting, because I think suddenly, I think suddenly putting that forward sort of puts Councillor Griffin and indeed Councillor Rippeth potentially on the spot. So let's go for Councillor Griffin for skills. But if you want to talk outside the meeting and come to a different decision, so be it. But for now, everyone happy with Councillor Griffin? Brilliant. Thank you very much, Councillor Griffin. So that's Councillor Griffin and Councillor Rippeth for skills. Then we move on to the Combined Authority Forward Plan. We're just asked to note this or make any comments. Does anyone have any comments or discussion points? Oh, I found it last night. No, I found it last night. Okay. Oh, right. Oh, it's obviously gone today. I did find it last night, but maybe I went direct. Anyway. No comments on that. So we're just asked to note that. So we'll note that. And then we move on to our draft work programme. So, Anne, do you want to introduce that?
Thank you, Chair. The report asks the committee to review their work programme and suggest any changes or amendments they'd like to make.
Councillor Hassel.
One thing when we talked about going back to the board, in terms of our work programme, I'd be interested to know whether the board would like us to specifically look at something. That we could potentially add to our work programme.
Any other comments, questions? I'm very happy on behalf of the committee to write to the board and ask them if there's anything specific they would like us to look at.
Just to come out, I just think it would be helpful to connect us better with the board. I just noticed that they are going through even more papers and even more things than we are, just having some specific reviews from the ONS members of the ONS committee might be helpful.
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, so if we have no further comments, we'll note that. So then our next meeting, we have a scheduled informal meeting on the 9th of January. It says on the agenda that it's going to be Microsoft Teams. It will in fact be a face-to-face meeting because it will be followed by the meeting we were discussing earlier to look at the budget and decide on our consultation response. And that, of course, is a meeting that will have to be held in public. So we haven't got a venue yet, but it will be a face-to-face meeting on the 9th of January, and it will be our informal meeting and our chance to look at our response to the budget consultation. And then our next scheduled meeting is the 29th of January, where no doubt we'll look at the budget again, because we'll then be looking at it in the light of all the consultation responses. So thank you all very much. Despite my email over the weekend, we've managed to keep to time. So thank you all very much. The meeting is closed. Thank you. 10 minutes to